So whenever I go to Tampa and I visit my godson, Deshaun, and he offers the grace for the meal, his grace always takes me aback a little bit. Whenever Deshaun does the grace, he offers a grace that many of us thank God for the food that's in front of us, for the joy of family, for the safety and security of his home. But one of the things that Deshaun always lifts up, and what is very much a culture of his family, is he always thanks God for the jobs that his mom and dad have, for their employment. And he always thanks God for the paycheck that those jobs afford their family to be able to bring in reliably every month. And then he goes and thanks God for the food that they're about to participate and partake in, connecting up that food just doesn't come out of nowhere, that in many ways it takes financial resources to be able to find food and to have food on your table and a roof over your head, and to have relative safety in your midst. And because I often take for granted the gifts that I have been granted and graced with by God, I sometimes forget that once a month that this church has very graciously and amazingly paid me a livable wage. It's the first church that's ever paid me a livable wage. I've been paid wages before, but I haven't been able to live on them. This is the first church that I've ever had that has paid me a livable wage. And yet, after 7 years, I find myself kind of taking that for granted. And so, when that has been taken away, or if you've never had that to begin with, it sometimes it's those of us who have that in our lives sometimes forget that is such an amazing gift, a blessing that we should really be thankful for. Of course, there are folks in our lives, there are folks in our community, there are folks not that far away that have never really had much to begin with. And when I look at them, I don't know about you, but when I look at them, I think just for the grace of God go I. And yet our tradition teaches us that those who have and those who have not, those who used to have but do not have now, those who used to not have but have now, all of us are in this together. That togetherness is called the way of Christ. And so in the early church, when they blossomed from 120 people to over 3,000 people in a split second, and then within months ballooned to 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people within a matter of weeks and months, they found a great deal of need in their midst. And they started to ask themselves the question, how can we meet this need? Because not one single person within the early church had the resources to meet the need for all the 8,000 that were coming to them. And so they came up with this really brilliant idea, which was if all of us pool our resources together and then we start to distribute that out again, then each individual person who comes to us, the scriptures say, will not have a need, that everyone will have their need fulfilled. And I've been reading commentaries on this fourth chapter of Acts, this scripture verse that Jim read for us, and some of these commentaries have said that this is an example that the early church practiced socialism or communism. And I want to say to them, no, they couldn't have, because it hadn't been invented yet. Instead, what the early church practiced was something much older, much truer, as far as I'm concerned. What the early church practiced was communitarianism, which is that the community, the village, we take care of each other. That through the way of Christ, we take his example of taking loaves and fishes, and we break it, and we pass it, so that there isn't a person who is without a need, and that all of those needs are taken care of. We can't do this by ourselves. That house couldn't be built by one single person. It took a community. It took people doing a little bit. It took people doing a lot. It took people who had financial resources contributing. It took people who had time resources going. there are many of you who would love to have gone, but your time just wasn't available to you, or you didn't have the physical ability to go on the trip itself. And so your prayer resources were part of what you gave. The community saw a need, and we tried our very best to fill it. That is what it means to be communitarian. That's what it means to be a church. So this year we had 21 people in total go from Kensington Community Church. We had a few who have been so brave, like our older youth, to share a little bit about their experience. And so I want to invite Wes and Kay Marie and John to come forward to share a little bit about what you experienced on the trip and how this community saw a need down with our neighbors in Puerto Nuevo, and we did our best to fulfill it.
Thanks, Darryl, and thanks, everybody. It's my third time going down there with my kids, and I mean, you heard it's a very profound experience. I mean, I like the analogies that Darryl brought up about community and who has what and who doesn't have what and how we all help each other out. Some of you may have even gone down to Puerto Nuevo to have a lobster and a beer. You know exactly where this place is, but it's just up the hill opposite the coast looking down. Talking about work, you know, I work in a cubicle job. You know, I shuffle papers around, check boxes, things like that. It's not anything it's largely absurd. And so this is the hardest physical, spiritual experience I have every year. And to go down and share with, you know, young folks who have more flexible spines than I do, it's an amazing experience. But you know, so here I am sitting in my cubicle, air conditioned. It's fairly comfortable. I'm checking boxes on a screen and fantasizing about winning the lottery. And putting it in perspective, I realized that, you know, relative to other folks, I've won the lottery. And then we get an opportunity to give them a gift of a home, which to them is like winning the lottery. It's, you know, like those home shows where here's the keys and oh my goodness, and you go inside and it's like that, but in Mexico. And, well, I mean, it just puts so much in perspective, and I'm just glad that I had a chance to be some small part of it, and I really appreciate that. Thank you all.
Good morning. So, like Wes, this was my third trip as well, and it's interesting. Every year we build the same house, but every year there's unique differences to each trip. This trip went super smooth. Last year we were kind of rushing at the end to get everything done. This year we were kind of done by the end of the first day, which was nice. It was kind of unexpected. You got to see a lot of new faces this year. I got to bring my son Wesley with me for the first time. Some of the other kids, confirmands, Irie and Sage, got to go, and Jaden got to go. It was great to see all the new faces. We always get to meet new people from outside the church too. I got to meet Ronnie, who works in the same industry as my wife, and he's got family on 4 different continents. It's always really interesting to meet these new folks. Got to meet Kay Marie's neighbor. Was it Joe? Rob, who I'm pretty sure if we needed to build a second house, he could have done it pretty much himself. If his nail gun had been working, we would have been done by noon on Friday. And there's also the bonding experiences, which is a really big part of the trip for me too. There's the time we spend on the rooftop of the orphanage after dinner on Friday, which is always really special. As Eve mentioned, you got to play soccer with the local kids, except the soccer ball was a dead snake. And you also got to enjoy going through the border checkpoint for an hour in an non-air-conditioned van with 9 other people. You haven't bonded with people until you've gone through that. But of course, the main reason is always the same. What's great about the trip is always the same. And you get to be a small part of something that's really a profound impact on people's lives. And it's something that I'll always remember and take with me forever. And I didn't do as much work this year. We had a lot of people, and I jumped around and did a bunch of different stuff. But even though I didn't work as much, I didn't feel any less a part of making that profound impact on people. So it was really, really special. And if y'all get a chance to go, if you haven't gone, you should. Thanks.
So I have been wanting to go for 3 years, and I was excited that this was the first year that I could go with my time and also take Sage. About 2 months ago, Sage had a heritage report due at school, and she had to pick someone in her family to teach her her schoolmates about her heritage. And the Moreno name comes from her Mexican father and his family. And so she had the opportunity to go talk to Hermita one night, and we spent 2 hours learning about her journey at 13 years old traveling across the border. But what was more important was the journey that happened before she was 13, and that was living with a grandmother, and when the grandma passed, living with a stranger in a 2-bedroom house with a dirt floor. And so this trip that came up for me really helped marry this heritage for Sage and what we were going to experience. And I was hoping that for her and for myself that it would provide a bit of a generation gap of understanding. And so although it was 60 years ago that Benita came across the border, when we crossed the border, it was taking a bit of a step back and understanding that the world that is just 20 minutes south is so different than the world that we are accustomed to here. Walking along the edges, and you saw those rolling hills, and seeing the smile on that mother's face as she worked alongside us for 2 days was remarkable. Watching those children take the blocks from when we cut them, they would grab them and build structures so her little horse could play in it was remarkable. There wasn't phones, there wasn't computers, there was no running water, there was no showers, but it didn't matter because we all came together as a community. The build was remarkable. I've been in many churches, and this is the first church that I have felt so much love, so much community, and so much pride for being there and supporting each other, but mostly supporting this family. And the story of life when you cross the border is so different in many ways that we're accustomed to. And although we're not house builders, we can bring the love and we can bring the need and awareness for what is going on in Mexico right now. And we can't build every house for every person, but we can show love.
One of my favorite quotes from the science fiction writer Moreno says that sooner or later, we have to make a choice. We're either going to add to the level of indifference and the darkness that indifference brings and the absolute evil of apathy, or we're going to be the light that gets lit, that overcomes the darkness. In many small and big ways, this congregation is so generous, and we add our little lights to really blaze out into the community. Not only do we do things that are so public, that get videos that go up on YouTube, but the tremendous generosity and spirit of this community to see a need and try to fill it reaches out into our own backyard as well. Many of you know that we participate in the furnishing of an apartment for El Nido. El Nido is a shelter for women who have been victims of domestic violence, who have escaped, and they are trying to take those first steps on their journey to recovery and really into hope. And so we furnish an apartment, and when a family leaves, when a mother and her children leave the El Nido apartment, they can take everything with them, from the couches to the last knife and fork. And this last time that we had an El Nido apartment that the mother and the children left, they took everything. And so we had to furnish the apartment basically from a completely empty apartment. How do we do that? We do that from one, we had a tremendous and generous donor of a congregant who had a store credit at a furniture store here in San Diego, and instead of using that on himself, he donated it to the church so that we could go and get new furniture. Then we had something called the Memorial Day Pancake Breakfast. How many of you whipped up eggs, flipped a pancake, bust a table, came and ate some eggs and some pancakes? And all of those proceeds then went to the furnishing of the apartment. And so now there is a mother with 3 small children in a home that is safe, that they can come back to every single day, and the children can do their homework. They can go to bed and wake up every night in a midst of light and love. These are just 2 examples, El Nido and Casas de Luz, where a community pulls their resources together in the spirit of the way of Christ, a communitarian spirit of love and generosity, of kindness, of multiplying bread and fishes, so that we can answer the prayer of our benediction, which we say every single week. By the love of God, may we all have what we need to live abundantly this day. And through the grace of Christ, may we share what we can with those in need, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, we may find healing and have peace today and all of our tomorrows. Thank you, sisters and brothers, for all that you do to live out the way of Christ and the communitarian spirit of what it means to be church. Amen.